Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Michael Costa Show. This will be another weekly COVID update where I talk to you about all the new things I found about COVID in the last week or so. So we've seen last weekend was the protest or the walk for the government to reopen organized sports for the kids. We saw a lot of people there. Some people say 5,000, some people say 10. Impossible to know the exact numbers, but there was a lot of people. Our tyrannical government was pissed. I have a video of François Legault this week in the press conference blasting the opposition members of the parties in the opposition that were present at that walk. There's also a strike going on where parents are keeping their kids for 3 days at home following spring break to protest the mask mandate for elementary school children, which I think is ridiculous. So, okay, let's start off with that subject. Here in Austria, I'll show you. The Supreme Court has ruled it illegal, the mask mandate at school and in classes. So, the population has brought up a lawsuit and the Supreme Court judged that it was illegal, mask mandate to mandate kids to wear masks in elementary school in their classes. We also have here a study that was done by the Quebec government, for the Quebec government, sorry. It was done by Jean-François Chicoine, pediatrician at Saint-Justine, Marie-Claude Roy, developmentalist pediatrician at the Hospital University of Sherbrooke, Marc Lebel, pediatrician, infectious specialist pediatrician at Saint-Justine, with the collaboration of speech, how can I say this? Speech doctors, let's call them that. Alexandre Drouin-Paquette, Marie-Claude Paquette, Martin Paquin, and Annie Salois. Okay, so this is in French, so I translated it for you. I'll read it. What the conclusion they came from that study they made, or that report, if you will. Wearing a mask in an adult caring for a child has direct consequences on the child's development and learning. These injuries or missed opportunities concern his sensory perceptive, socio-emotional, and language development. In the long run, wearing a mask could explain why children communicate less, why children do not know how to communicate, why children are less empathetic when they communicate, and why their thought process have not been sufficiently enriched by the communication. This support by educators, teachers, and some caregivers is therefore a serious subject that must urgently be taken into account. So, it's from the ooaq.qc.ca website. It's published on their website, and that's basically the summary of their conclusion from this report. Basically saying that in this case, they're talking about adults, whereas educators at daycares or teachers in elementary school, especially in the early grades, how wearing a mask while doing this can affect their learning capabilities. And we've already seen other pediatricians come out against this mask mandate in elementary schools. So this is not the first time. I've already pointed out in previous videos. Now here, I'm going to get to what François Legault said. Now bear with me because this video is in French. I'll try, and it's the part that it's important to us lasts about 4 minutes. So bear with me, I'll try to translate as it goes along. Okay, Here, I'll put it in big screen for you guys.
Là, bien sûr, puis Mais là, on voit que ça va quand même relativement rondement. Oui, il y a des régions, puis il y a des gens qui nous écrivent Rimouski.
Oh, something went wrong. Okay. I don't know what went wrong, but something went wrong. Okay, so I guess let me try to refresh it for you guys.
Là, bien sûr, mais là, on voit que ça va quand même relativement rondement. Oui, il y a des régions, puis il y a des gens qui nous écrivent Rimouski, ailleurs, qui disent ça va pas assez vite à notre goût, bien sûr, mais la priorité...
Mais ça va aller vite.
Ça va aller
vite quand ça va commencer. Okay. Et là, on a de l'espace pour faire ça.
Bon, il y a des gens qui trouvent que ça va pas assez vite dans l'ouverture des sports. On l'a vu dimanche avec cette manifestation. Et ça a comme piqué, est-ce que c'est ça ou d'autres choses? Mais en tout cas, ça, entre autres, qui ont piqué un peu le premier ministre. Il a vu des élus à cette marche, le chef du Parti québécois, entre autres, si je ne m'abuse. Je cherche les images, là, en tout cas, on va le voir. Et d'autres. Je vous fais entendre M. Legault cet après-midi, puis on revient.
Here we go.
Les leaders dans notre société ont une responsabilité. Ils ne peuvent pas aller dire, là, je compte ça, là, les restrictions dans le sport, je compte ça, le fait que le secondaire 3, 4, 5 sont une journée sur 2. S'ils disent ça, ça veut dire qu'ils sont contre la science, sont contre la santé publique. Aujourd'hui, la santé publique n'est pas prête à ce qu'on aille plus loin dans les sports. Puis moi, je souhaite que tous nos leaders, incluant ici à l'Assemblée nationale, soient solidaires, soient responsables, puis appuient la science, appuient la santé publique.
Okay. So what he's saying here is he can't believe that opposition leaders at the National Assembly that support or that are not solidaire with the governmental measures, he says they don't support, they're against the science. Well, that's a bunch of bullshit. And I didn't use BS because this serves the time to call it as it is, which is bullshit. Because, like he said, many times, he's the one that makes the final decision. And as we've seen from documents and emails that have been put out of the public health communication with government officials, that many of his decisions were going against recommendations from the public health officials. So this is him asking the opposition, which is their job, to oppose government decisions. Not automatically, obviously. They could agree with some measures. But what he's asking for is for the opposition to agree with all the measures and stay silent about all the government decisions in this pandemic. And that just doesn't make sense. That's talk of a dictator. And I'm not saying he's a dictator. Like I've said before, I think that it is a sanitary dictatorship. And you could go back to my videos to see what I mean by that. But the way he's talking here is basically trying to silence the opposition and the people that don't agree with the measures that he decided. Like he said, the final decision comes down to him. Later on in the video, I'm not going to show you because it's in French, so I don't want people to get bored that don't understand French. But basically, all three of them are against what he says, saying, since when is it wrong to contest a government decision? And who is the prime minister or the premier, to decide what the opposition could support or not? And when he says if they're not solidaire with my decisions, that they're against the science, well, here you go, another study published by Nature journal, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. 5 days ago it was published. Okay? Titled Stay-at-Home Policy is a Case of Exception Fallacy, an internet-based ecological study. I'll read you the abstract, which is basically a summary of the study. A recent mathematical model has suggested that staying at home did not play a dominant role in reducing COVID-19 transmission. The second wave of cases in Europe in regions that were considered as COVID-19 controlled may raise some concerns. Our objective was to assess the association between staying at home percentage and the reduction increase in the number of deaths due to COVID in several regions in the world. In this ecological study, data from Google.com COVID-19 mobility, ourworldindata.org, and covid.sau.gov.br, which is a Brazilian government website, were combined. Countries with less than 100 deaths and with a healthcare access and quality index of less than 67 were included. Data were processed and analyzed using the difference between number of deaths millions between two regions and the difference between the percentage of staying at home. The analysis was performed using linear regression with special attention to residual analysis. After pre-processing the data, 87 regions around the world were included, yielding 3,741 pairwise comparisons for linear regression analysis. Only 63, 1.6% comparisons were significant. With our results, we were not able to explain if COVID mortality is reduced by staying at home. In more or less 98% of the comparisons after epidemiological weeks 9 to 34. So to not get into the scientific wording, basically what they say is they couldn't find proof that lockdowns reduce the number of cases and the number of deaths. Now there's been hundreds of these studies. This is just the latest one. How lockdowns are not the way to fight this pandemic. And yet Legault is going to tell the opposition that they're not following the science, or that they're not listening to the science because they're questioning a measure which is the closing of organized sports for children or for teenagers. Spare me your self-righteous blabber. Okay? Because, like we see here, the source here is the public health, Canada Public Health, okay? Quebec, which is the one with the strictest measures, lockdown measures in Canada, have the worst rate of deaths related to COVID by over doubling every single province. Only Manitoba is a bit less than double, with 121. The second one is Manitoba with 65 rate of deaths related to COVID. Okay? So, if he's following the science, which he's not, and he thinks he's doing a good job with the measures, because Quebec has been the one with the strictest measures in North America, but at the same time, they have one of the worst results in North America. So something's not working here. After a year of this, are we allowed to question the decisions he's made? I sure hope so. Here, the source is the National Institute of Public Health of Quebec. Okay? Quebec went from 2,870 new cases on December 29th to 498 March 2nd. See the graph. Only 14% of regular hospital beds and 8% of intensive care beds designed specifically for COVID are right now being occupied. So 14% of hospital beds and 8% of intensive care beds. So what they were saying at the beginning of the year in January, end of December, beginning of January, that it was because of hospitals being in overcapacity. Well, that's not the case. That's not the case now, at least. So now they're using the variants. Where like in Denmark, more than half of the new cases are the variants. And yet the cases still are dropping. Or I can use again California, which has many variants with strict lockdowns. Or Florida, with no lockdowns, have about the same numbers of cases and deaths. So obviously lockdowns are not the the way to fight this pandemic. Like I've said many times, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but that's just the case. So anybody that talks against the go-to narrative of the government and the media. Now people say, oh, you think you're a conspiracy theorist because you think the media is colluding with the governments. No, they're not. The media just sees the rise in ratings and the rise in publicity that they're selling, the money they're making from publicity, because people are glued to their TVs. Well, at least let me try to be nice. At least the ones that are scared, to not say weak-minded, that are glued to their TVs to know every single thing the government is saying or the new expert is saying, under air quotations, while they see that the fear-mongering is working and it's benefiting them it's benefiting their wallets. So that's why they want to continue with this narrative of endless fear. And anybody who talks about it, doctors, even doctors included, get sanctioned. Like in this case, published in the Montreal Gazette. Doctor who said Canada doesn't need COVID vaccine calls online critics hyenas in $6.8 million libel suit. Okay, when an Ontario doctor argued publicly that Canadians need neither a vaccine nor lockdowns to combat COVID-19, but should rely instead on a controversial malaria drug, some of their response was sharp. But she's not the only one. Okay? A year since the first lockdown was imposed, the case seems to underscore the bitter divisions spawned by the virus and efforts to curb it, even among healthcare professionals. So obviously there's a divide about the way to go forward amongst the healthcare professionals in the industry. So some people say you don't want to listen to the doctors, to the scientists. No, that's not the case. I just don't want to listen to the ones you are pushing. I choose to listen to others and then weigh what they're saying to what your corporate doctors are saying. Here in the Toronto Sun by Anthony Furry, it's not just businesses that's hurting. It's all of society. It's life itself. The other day, someone was telling me how they were only now just getting started with a volunteer program to assist refugees in Canada get on their feet. A year after they just first signed up for it. First, there was the initial shock of the first wave that put everything on hold. Then there was the fact that police had paused the background check program that's required before you can commence certain types of volunteering. And in the time it takes to get everyone up to speed on turning what was supposed to be an in-person experience into a much less rewarding virtual program, and you can see how the weeks turn into a year of delay. But that's just one of the millions of stories of meaningful activities that make our country what it is and make us who we are, that we have been put on hold for an entire year. I use the example of volunteerism for a reason, though, because we often hear about how the restrictions are unfair to small businesses, which of course they are, and they were wrong and should not have been done. But it's not just small businesses that is suffering. It boggles the mind when people shrug off the devastating effects of lockdowns by simply saying that at least we're putting people's health ahead of business or the economy. That's not what is going on at all. What we have locked down is pretty much all aspects of society, aside from the purchase of essential goods and online consumerism. Volunteerism, community associations, cultural events, faith groups, children's activities, organized sports. These are all things that transcend whatever people think they mean when they sneer the phrase the economy. These activities taken together are life itself. He's right. Personally, I consider myself blessed that one of my favorite hobbies, golf, was more or less unimpeded throughout 2020, and I actually played more games and courses than I would in a usual year. Not everyone has been so lucky, What about, say, a senior citizen whose great passion is attending every performance of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra? Obviously, large indoor gatherings involving high-risk seniors will be some of the last things to reopen. Perfectly normal. Now, if you don't care for classical music, this is no big deal. But what if it is what your life revolves around, as it surely is for many thousands of Canadians? For so many people, the thing they live for has been taken away from them. For some people, what keeps them alive was taken from them. Like the gentleman who wrote me about the cancellation of his addiction support group. They canceled the meetings of his addiction support group. Imagine the people that depend on these meetings to stay sober. There's more evidence of devastating collateral damage that has been done to society because of government inefficient lockdown measures. We've learned so much this past year about who is at high risk of COVID-19 and where and how it spreads. But instead of using this information to make smart decisions about reopening society, it's become clear that too many Canadian public health officials have developed a cult-like obsession with stamping out every single case of the virus, no matter the harms that they cause along the way. Instead of putting in the work to find ways to make things happen, they look for every opportunity to shut things down. A small but telling example here in Toronto is not just corporate gyms that are shut down, the fitness rooms inside condo buildings are also closed. There's no reason why a workaround can't be figured out, like say one person allowed at a time for 30-minute slots and they have to sign in at the security desk or something like that. To keep such facilities closed is nothing but idiocy, and the officials endorsing these rules deserve to be publicly ridiculed. Same for so many other activities that should and could have reopened sooner, or in this case of heavily locked down Toronto, should be open right now. And we could say the same thing about here in Montreal. All you need to do is look south of the border to see how Democrat and Republican leaders alike are coming up with creative solutions and responsibly reopening things. They've been doing it for months, and now the sky hasn't fallen. We've certainly seen many businesses collapse across Canada, and good people have gone deeply into debt or lost their life savings. It's tragic. The full accounting of harms, which will be felt for years to come, is much broader than that, though. What we're really seeing is the atrophying of our entire society. Shame on those who presided over it, and shame on those who cheered it on. Plain and simple, folks. Sums it up right there. The idiocy of these measures. Look, according to Forbes, Connecticut, which is far from being a conservative state, lifting all COVID-19 capacity restrictions on businesses, including restaurants and gyms. And they're right close to us. A few hours away, a few hour drive away. They're opening everything and lifting all COVID-19 capacity on businesses, including restaurants and gyms. Even an institution that I despise and that most of the time I do not agree with, the United Nations, its president, Antonio Guterres, don't know how to pronounce his name, don't care. He says, and they're usually for these restrictive authoritarian measures, but he says, a pandemic of abuses, human rights under attack during COVID, says UN head. A Guardian exclusive, freedoms have been crushed and free speech impeded by governments around the world, says Antonio Guterres. The world is facing a pandemic of human rights abuses, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said. Authoritarian regimes had imposed drastic curbs on rights and freedoms and had used the virus as a pretext to restrict free speech and stifle dissent. Big words there, and he's right there. See, I'll call him out when he's wrong. especially on the climate issue. But I'll praise him when he's right, like in this. There has been a global crackdown on opposition activists and human rights defenders, increased attacks on journalists, and moves to curb free speech, censor the media, roll out invasive tracking apps, and put in place extreme surveillance measures, many of which are likely to far outlast the virus. Because like I've said many times, once the government takes away your rights temporarily, a majority of the time, it's taken away from you permanently. Many governments use the pandemic to suppress free speech. 83 governments have used the pandemic to justify violating free speech and peaceful assembly, including here in Quebec, I'm sure. Countries have used COVID laws. 51 countries have used COVID laws to arbitrarily arrest, detain, and prosecute critics of government, resulting in fines and imprisonment. 33 governments have threatened critics, in some cases with prosecution, if they criticize their response to their pandemic. In our case, what they're doing is maybe not prosecuting them, but threatening them with losing their jobs and being rectified, or not rectified, sorry, being eliminated from the order of their profession. 24 countries have enacted vague laws and measures that criminalize spreading alleged misinformation or other coverage of COVID, which we've seen, especially by big tech. As soon as you talk about anything that goes against the COVID narrative, there's either a fact check, or you're banned, or you're suspended for 24 days, a week, a month. 18 is the number of countries in which journalists, bloggers, and protesters have been assaulted by police or military. Countries have blocked specific COVID-19 related media reports or shut down media outlets that are reporting on the pandemic. The number of countries where protests against government responses to COVID-19 is 10. Or other unrelated policies have been arbitrarily banned or broken up. 8 countries have suspended or restricted the right to request and receive information from the authorities, including on public health matters. They say 8 countries have suspended or restricted the right to request and receive information from the authorities. Well, that's exactly what François Legault, Premier of Quebec, did for months by refusing to release the official public health recommendations, which eventually were released, and we came to find out that he wasn't even following those recommendations. Okay? Now, I want to show you what I've learned. What I've learned from this pandemic in the past year. I want to finish off my video with this. Our healthcare system is archaic and failing. Number 1. Number 2, the centralization of decisions and resources harms. We lack hospital capacity. That was number 3. Number 4, load something shedding has always existed, and it's completely absurd considering the money we put into this system. Number 5, our old people do not die with dignity. Number 6, the state of health emergency gives too much power to the government if it is renewed every 10 days without any political consequences, which actually goes against Canada's public health law, or Quebec's public health law, sorry. Media grants made them completely docile. That's true. Subsidies given from government to media has made them, has made them less likely to question every government measure. Public health, number 8, public health must have more power and be even more decentralized. Decisions have been too much shown in this crisis. Central trade unions have too much power. The quieter they are, the more you have to beware. That's true. It is easier to take freedoms from citizens than to bend a union. Any subsidized organization can be very docile if threatened to withdraw them if it does not adopt the official discourse. Number 12, our mandarins do not have enough freedom of speech. Political power has too much control over them. When we let the officials play economics, they only succeed in... I don't know if I should read that. I forgot about that one. Succeed in basically ducking the dog, I'll say, and not understanding what they are doing. Number 14, Quebec entrepreneurs are among the most resilient in the world. They always manage to adapt no matter what bullshit the government sends them in their backyard. Their way, if you will. Imagine if we let them innovate now. If the money is raining, everyone shuts their mouths. Borrowing to make people comfortable by their docility is the future way of bondage. No good news for anyone. There are surely others, but who cares? I must be one of the few to talk about all this. No political party and no media discuss any of these topics. This is what makes Quebec so despicable. There's no capacity for introspection. Well, folks, there you go. Here you have, I showed you in today's edition of my show, the Michael Costa Show, how Austria, the Supreme Court in Austria has judged that the mask mandates for children in schools is illegal. I've shown you how pediatricians, have come up with a report saying that teachers and educators in daycares that wear masks while taking care of the kids and educating the kids are a danger for the development of those kids. I also showed you the bullshit of François Legault wanting the opposition leaders to just shut up and obey his useless and dangerous pandemic measures. I've showed you a study, another one, after the many that I've showed you before, saying that lockdowns, a recent one that was done this week, saying that lockdowns do not work to stop the spread of COVID-19 cases and deaths. I've showed you how Quebec, even though being the strictest measures, have the worst results in this pandemic in North America. I've showed you how they try to stifle dissent coming from doctors that don't agree with their narrative. I've showed you by Anthony Furey's op-ed in the Toronto Sun how the pandemic lockdowns have caused damage to all aspects of society. I've showed you how other jurisdictions around North America are opening up everything while us were still on curfew. I've showed you the UN head that I usually don't agree with, but that I do agree in this moment, saying that governments are using this pandemic to stifle our human rights. And then I end with the conclusions I've come up with after a year of this pandemic and what's wrong with Quebec's health system. Some things that are wrong with Quebec's health system. For years, we've been sounding the alarm on Quebec's health system. This problem didn't arise because of the pandemic. It's because of a centralization of powers. But we could get into that another day. So guys, that was my COVID update for the week. Thanks for tuning in to the Michael Costa Show. I hope to see you soon. Peace out.